Look, I think high-speed rail has got a lot of things to add into the mix. When you're talking about a population growth like we're going to see in Australia over the coming 40 years, you really start to build the economic case for changing the transport mix, for changing the way that people move, and more particularly to change where and how people live and work and how they move between those commitments. What we need to do is get on with identifying where a high-speed rail line would run, make sure those corridors are protected, and then go very carefully about building the economic case to make sure that it is a realistic option and it remains a realistic option over the decades ahead. Look, we're talking about a link that ultimately should run from the Sunshine Coast through to Melbourne and possibly beyond to Geelong. So we're talking about a very large network, we're talking about a very expensive network, but we're also talking about a very valuable opportunity to change the way that Australia functions. Well, in the research we did, we looked at the opportunity to connect Sydney to an existing airport, to get around that very difficult issue of where do you put a second Sydney airport. If you go down that path, it immediately enhances the economic case by around $15 billion in terms of avoided costs. So we think that a connection between Sydney and its second airport probably makes sense, and then you build out incrementally from there so that you're ultimately connecting Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne on a high-speed rail East Coast network. Look, there's no doubt that there would be opportunities for private investment in something like a high-speed rail network across Australia's east coast, but at the end of the day it's not going to be economically feasible without government support. So if we're going to be serious about high-speed rail, then we need to understand that there are going to need to be very significant capital outlays from government to make it a reality. High-speed rail is a realistic, it is a feasible option, provided we get the planning right. What we need to do is make sure that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past, that we don't close off the future options. That means making difficult decisions about where high-speed rail is going to run, making sure that we put in place the planning protections along those corridors so that they are still available in 20, 30, 40 and 50 years' time as different connections in an East Coast high-speed rail network become feasible. We can't repeat the mistakes of the past. We need to keep future options open.